Welcome back to Shok's Talks. I'm Shakti, and on this channel, I'm sharing a high level overview of the things I've learned over the past decade regarding UFOs, UAPs, the nature of reality, and consciousness. We're starting with UFOs, and we're moving through a timeline that begins in 1947. There's a lot that comes before this year, but 1947 is the beginning of the flying saucer craze in the US. I'll be discussing major events in UFO history, as well as current happenings, and there will always be some recommendations in the links below for resources that can take you deeper into your own research. Right now, we're going back to Roswell, New Mexico, and we're going to talk about the UFO hearing that occurred today, July 26, 2023. Last episode, we touched on Kenneth Arnold's sighting of 9 flying saucers over Mount Rainier, Washington State, June 1947. The term flying saucer was coined and spread, and less than a month later, the Roswell incident occurred. And a quick note about Roswell, it's totally just mired in controversy and confusion, and the way I see it, there's whatever happened, and then there's the official cover story. We'll get into all of it, but these are some of the murkier waters on the timeline, and it's relevant because this is the beginning of government secrecy and cover-ups, also a lot of secret programs. It's the beginning of a lot of distrust, and the tone that was set after Roswell has pretty much encompassed the whole subject of UFOs since then, which is very relevant to the hearing we had today. The positive outcome of all of this is the development of the UFO community beyond the government, the sheer determination of the people to find and share truth, the DIY nature of many civilians and organizations taking things into their own hands, and the growing public interest over time. When you start down this path of learning, you're going to be combing through a lot of material, most of which comes from independent researchers, experiencers, whistleblowers, historians, psychiatrists, and ex-military and Navy people too. I see this as very powerful and inspiring. We don't necessarily need the government to be the holders of the most important information. We do, however, need each other and a lot of communication. So let's get into it. It's July 1st, 1947, when radar at the Army's 509th Airfield outside of Roswell started to show strange blips. The same thing was happening at White Sands, the nearby guided missile base. The radar equipment was thoroughly checked and deemed okay, but the inexplicable blips kept showing up, and of course, everyone went on high alert. The activity continued throughout the night and into the next day. Army intelligence in Washington orders additional counterintelligence personnel to New Mexico, and all the while, crazy thunder and lightning storms are happening, which is kind of like right now, because there's thunder and rain is coming. Right around or on the 4th of July, one of the radar blips gets weird and erratic and flashes and seems to crash. There is an immediate response from the military who goes to find whatever it is. They're thinking it's an enemy aircraft and they want to secure the site. Many locals saw something too, and some called in a plane crash. So without knowing the military is already on their way, the fire department and local sheriff are heading to the site as well. The 509th gets there first and sets up floodlights and a fence. Now, we're going to hear a story from Philip Corso's book, but first a little about him. Corso worked at the Pentagon in the 60s, and because of his intelligence background, he inherited what he called the single file cabinet that held the Army's deepest and most closely guarded secret, the Roswell files. And I heard about this book through Daniel Sheehan, a lawyer, now affiliated with the Romero Institute. He was speaking at Contact in the Desert 2023. A quote from Corso's book, The Day After Roswell. Thunder. The Roswell file was the legacy of what happened in the hours and days after the crash when the official government cover-up was put into place. As the military tried to figure out what it was that had crashed, where it had come from, and what its inhabitants' intentions were, a covert group was assembled under the leadership of the Director of Intelligence, Admiral Roscoe Hillenkoetter, to investigate the nature of flying discs and collect all information about encounters with these phenomena while, at the same time, publicly and officially discounting the existence of all flying saucers. This operation has been going on in one form or another for 50 years amidst complete secrecy. So this could be the beginning of all the stuff that we're hearing about today, even though in today's hearing they're really focusing on recent events going kind of into the past decade and not really further than that. But I think this is all really relevant. This is kind of the beginning of this era. So a little note from Wikipedia about Corso and his book. Corso claims he stewarded extraterrestrial artifacts recovered from a crash near Roswell, New Mexico in 1947. According to Corso, the reverse engineering of these artifacts indirectly led to the development of accelerated particle beam devices, fiber optics, lasers, integrated circuit chips, and Kevlar material. I just think that's interesting because people talk a lot about the reverse engineering of craft and exotic materials, and this is an example of some of the current technologies that may have been derived from such objects. Here's another passage from the day after Roswell, and this story is about Steve Arnold, who was posted in the airfield control tower watching the radar when the crash occurred. So he saw that bright flash on the radar, and this is the story of his experience at the site immediately after. It looked more like a crash landing because the craft was intact except for a split seam running lengthwise along the side. Remember, thunder and lightning were happening when this thing crashed, so could be related to the crash, to the reason for the crash. He assumed it was a craft, even though it was like no airplane he'd ever seen. He angled himself as close to the split seam of the craft as he could get without stepping in front of the workers in hazardous material suits who were checking the site for radiation, and that was when he saw them in the shadow. Little dark gray figures, maybe 4.5 feet in length, sprawled across the ground. "Are those people?" Arnold heard someone say as medics rushed up with stretchers to the knife-like laceration along the side of the craft through which the bodies had either crawled or tumbled. He goes on to describe a few more of the figures standing motionless or leaning on a hill, and there are about 5 bodies in total. So at this time, a famous article is printed in the Roswell Daily Record, and the headline reads, "RAF, Roswell Army Airfield, captures flying saucer on ranch in Roswell region." Now, this ranch part has to do with the fact that there was some debris on a nearby ranch that Mac Brazel found and later turned in to the Roswell sheriff, George Wilcox, who then contacted the Air Force, and they sent their people to search the debris field for anything else that might have been left behind. And here is going to be a quote about the debris from a book by Richard Dolan called UFOs for the 21st Century Mind. He's referring to intelligence officer Captain Jesse Marcel here. "There was a gouge in the ground, about 500 feet long. Marcel noticed debris as thin as newsprint, but which was incredibly strong. Later, another soldier told Marcel that this debris could not be dented, not even by a sledgehammer. There was also foil, which when crumpled would return to its shape without wrinkles. Marcel noticed I-beams with odd symbols on them. The beams would flex slightly but not break." I don't know exactly what they mean by I-beams. Maybe that just indicates I, the letter I, as in the shape of it. Not really sure about that. So here's my take on all of this, and it's based in things I've heard, things I've read, things I've watched, things I've listened to, and kind of the general consensus of the UFO community as far as I can tell. Roswell. It started with strange radar activity. Then there was a crash, seen by military and civilians alike. The 509th Bomb Group retrieved something immediately, possibly a broken craft and bodies. A rancher found and turned in more debris later. An article was published about capturing a flying saucer, and then the story changed to, oops, we made a mistake. It was a weather balloon. Secrecy ensues. 75 years later, Nick Pope wrote an article for BBC Sky at Night magazine published June 22nd, 2022. In this article, he says, nowadays, with the 24/7 news cycle, internet, social media, and an activist community of UFO researchers, such a claim followed by such an about turn would no doubt cause controversy and conspiracy theories on a massive scale. This is especially true given that the 509th Bomb Group was the only atomic bomb-capable squadron anywhere in the world at the time. It's hard to imagine these elite personnel, many of whom were familiar with weather balloons, being fooled in this way. But post-war America was very different from today, and in that calmer, more trusting of authority era, the weather balloon explanation was almost universally believed. It's interesting that he brings up the more trusting era because that was also something I heard people talk about at the conference Contact in the Desert 2023. They were just saying that there was a time when people trusted the news and the government. So I'm going to end this chunk of our timeline with one more quote from UFOs for the 21st Century Mind by historian Richard Dolan. And I got to meet him at the conference as well as hear him speak. I've read his book, Alien Agendas, and I find him and his work to be very interesting. He's skeptical and thorough, and I think he's a really good person to follow when it comes to all of this. So here's his quote. The investigation of Roswell is a perfect example of how the formal government apparatus, in this case Congress, was inadequate when dealing with the true center of power, the clandestine secret keepers of the national security state. Meanwhile, the U.S. Air Force had taken the initiative to generate 2 reports on Roswell, stating first that all the confusion was caused by a downed top-secret Mogul high-altitude balloon, and later by airdrops of 6-foot-tall test dummies, which presumably were mistaken for tiny extraterrestrial bodies. Nitpicking these Air Force explanations is easy and has become something of a hobby among some researchers. Nevertheless, the Air Force's official explanation of Roswell, despite the fact that so few people believe it, has been able to maintain its standing within official media and political circles. There is much more to the Roswell story and subsequent debates. Much discussion has occurred over how many debris fields there actually were. More recently, the claim has been made that some researchers have found quality Kodachrome images of a dead alien, presumably from Roswell. As of this writing, no images have been released, but such a discussion at least proves that Roswell continues to be a fertile ground for investigation and heated debate. The first edition of this book was printed January 2014. Dolan points to the inability of Congress to penetrate secret keepers of the national security state, and this brings us to today. Right now, Representative Tim Burchett and others are asking to know whatever there is to know about UFOs, UAPs, and secret programs. They've been making a lot of noise about how the time has come for transparency and how the taxpayers deserve to know. So what did we learn in today's hearing? Well, we learned a lot, and I highly recommend watching it for yourself. Today, the Subcommittee on National Security, the Border, and Foreign Affairs held a hearing titled Unidentified Anomalous Phenomena, Implications on National Security, Public Safety, and Government Transparency. The witnesses were former Navy pilot Ryan Graves, United States Air Force officer and former intelligence official David Grush, and retired U.S. Navy Commander David Fravor. So I'll put a link below. I'm going to link you to Christina Gomez's YouTube channel, and you can see her recording of the hearing. And I like it because there's all the different time signatures, so you can jump around and check out specific questions that you want to hear the answers to. Basically, we had members of Congress just asking relevant questions to these witnesses who are under oath in order to get it on the public record. And it was cool. Like, some of the time they had to say, we can't answer this here, but if we go to, like, a private place, we can tell you more. There are certain things they couldn't say, but there was a lot that they did say. And the topics ranged from sightings to reverse engineered technologies to private companies to biological evidence. This hearing was bipartisan, available to the public, and the witnesses were under oath, like I said. The big message here is that a system needs to be established for the collection of sightings by pilots, both commercial and military or Navy. The witnesses suggested that having this system be sensor-centric would ensure objectivity and provide the best picture of what's going on. That's as opposed to opening it up to eyewitness accounts. They want to keep things as objective as possible. So they have these really highly developed sensors in their planes, and they're trying to say we need a system for collecting all the data that is picked up by those sensors. There was a lot of talk about how there's still a stigma around reporting. This goes back to the Roswell time and everything that occurred after that. There's a lot of fear among the pilots who worry these things will be held against them. They're nervous about not being able to advance in their careers or having bad health checks. The witnesses emphasized the risk for everyone in the airspace. The sightings are routine, and the craft that they're seeing are operating at levels far beyond our current technological capabilities. This is why it's a national security issue. The objects have been detected where all Navy operations are taking place around the world. Some of the craft that they described today included the Tic Tacs, as well as these dark gray or black cubes within a clear sphere. Really weird. These types of sightings have been occurring for over 8 years. And again, the big takeaway is we need a safe system for reporting, and we need to create more clarity in terms of what we're dealing with. So Richard Dolan, who I mentioned earlier, posted a short reaction video on YouTube. I think that's worth checking out. It's in the links below. He said he might post more later. All in all, it was pretty exciting, and I think everyone was blown away. It was more than we expected and kind of everything we hoped for. So it's a very big moment. I'm really looking forward to more of these hearings, maybe with different witnesses in the future. And I'm so curious to see where all of this is going to go. One of the things Dolan talked about in his reaction video was basically how the last time we saw this kind of energy was in the 1950s, and now we're seeing this genuine interest from Congress again. Whether or not this faction will succeed is the great drama that's unfolding. And that's about it for today. I mean, I honestly suggest you make yourself a delicious snack and get a drink and sit down and listen to this conversation. It just makes it all so real. If you ever had any doubt in your mind, I mean, this stuff is serious and people are taking it seriously, and there's just really no denying it any longer. So check out the hearing, link below. I want to show you these books. This is The Day After Roswell. That's Philip Corso's book. And this is UFOs for the 21st Century Mind. This is Richard Dolan's book. He has a lot of other books. I'm going to put links to the articles I talked about, and I hope you take a look at the hearing. Thank you so much for listening to Shock's Talks, and I can't wait to get into our next topic on episode 3. See you later.